Before we begin, a quick shout out to our longtime listeners and dear friends, Sophia and Michael, who just got married. Congratulations, we love you, and we hope you're enjoying your honeymoon.
Welcome to the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. This is the podcast where we work to dissect and analyze the epic, the amazing, the cool, the powerful, the impactful, the awesome, the improvable power of storytelling and learn how to harness that power in our everyday lives. I'm Gorv.
And I'm Kevin. Did you just say improvable? Is that a word?
I said improvable. I think it's a word. If it's not Webster's, I need you to add it because all words are made up. And I just made one. And yeah, improvable. It's definitely a word. You're so wrong. The more I use it, I'm like, there's no way this isn't a word. Let's be clear.
It is on Webster.
Yeah, see? I've made up some words for this show. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if I used it in the right context, grammatically.
That's definitely not a word.
Grammatically, that wasn't even a made-up word. That was a mess-up word. Grammatically, right? But I knew it was a word. Anyways, Kev, you and I, we both work in tech and we have a whole career, but we also both take fashion very seriously in very different ways. I go very vest, tie, kind of classic three-piece suit without the jacket. You go more trendy, modern, European
Shirt,
style,
no tie,
I would
blazer.
say. Yeah, but we both take fashion very seriously, especially for our industry. And I've always worn a tie to work every single day. And I've given many different reasons for it. I think there's a few different reasons for it, actually. There's I grew up on the East Coast, seeing my dad wear a tie every day. I always felt like that was the businessy work thing to do. I did private school, high school. In private school my whole life, I was in a uniform. I just got comfortable in a uniform. And there's this scene in The Bear where one of the main characters has to wear a suit to be the host of a restaurant. And he's always been kind of the host of his other restaurant, but he never saw the value of it. And then when he wore the suit and he saw how people used it, he's like, oh, this is armor. He was like, this gives me empowerment. This makes me feel a certain way. I think that's the reason I do it too. I think this is the thing about fashion that's really important. It's not about looking good. It's not about looking good. It's about feeling good. I truly believe that. And let me explain why. It's not about other people being like, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm wearing that tomorrow. Or it's not about like, oh, I wish I had that. It should be about finding that look that empowers you, that makes you feel good, that allows you to walk in somewhere and immediately be like starting at a higher level because you feel like you.
Someone asked me the other day, what's a good way of establishing self-affirmation? And I thought about that question and I realized for me, it's actually dressing up. It's picking out the outfit you want. It's for me in the morning, take a shower, fix my hair, picking out the outfit I'm feeling for the day, look into the mirror and realizing, okay, this is how I want to be. So I agree. I think a lot of what fashion can be is an expression of ourselves and maybe to ourselves as well, is when you look into that mirror and you see a reflection somewhere and realizing this is the story of me. This is the story I want to tell about myself today. This is the message. This is how I'm presenting myself. So I think fashion is a great way of self-affirmation.
But anyways, Kev, today's guest has nothing to do with fashion. Who are we talking to?
Not at all. Well, today we are talking to Professor Wade Langer, also known as ProfNoctis on YouTube and Twitch, if you follow video games at all. And what's special about ProfNoctis is he teaches religious history and theology at University of Alabama, but he teaches it with video games. I saw his profile. This is a very interesting mix. So luckily, we got in touch, and now we're having a great conversation about video games as a storytelling medium, the connection between some of the oldest stories known to mankind, as in religious stories, to one of the latest or newest storytelling mediums in video games.
He has a bachelor's in religion and religious studies, a doctor of ministry, religion, and leadership, and a master of divinity in religion and religious studies. Like, he is a well-educated person who's read very intense stuff, and he's like, I can teach this through video games. So I'm excited for this conversation. It's going to be great.
All right, let's dive right in.
Hello, how do you do? Sit down, gather around. We've got stories about stories that'll mix you a drink of wonder and mystique. Cause life can be dry, better dress for the times with the linen suit and plastic tie. Linen suit and plastic tie. Now here's Gaurav and Kevin.
So Wade, to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
So my name is Wade Langer, aka Professor Noctis or Prof Noctis on all of the internet. I'm a faculty member at the University of Alabama, where I teach a number of courses from religious studies, literature, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of philosophy, a lot of interdisciplinary stuff, all through video games. I did my doctoral dissertation on the use of a specific game, Final Fantasy 15, in teaching religious history and theology, and kind of thinking through the psychosocial effects of all of that. Why you would use a video game to teach humanities. Because you hear about people that utilize gaming or at least simulations for more technical jobs, but it really isn't done often for humanities. And so that was a really, really fun project, especially as far as dissertations go. Usually it's like, oh my gosh, another one of these. But this was a really fun one. So that's me. I do a number of other things. I work in student life at the University of Alabama. And then I've got a YouTube channel, a Twitch channel, and never dreamed that I would be a content creator, but here we are. So,
That's so interesting. We were talking a little bit before. We've had comic book professors on this show in a very similar realm of this. The idea of these mediums have grown over decades, and like any form of storytelling, like any form of medium, it is pulled on very familiar, very iconic, very human stories, right? There's that. It's a common joke we've joked about before. There's only like 6 types of stories, and they're all just retold constantly over different ways. But it's really interesting to explore the gaming world and understand how it's just another medium where we can connect with people in different ways. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like from writing the dissertation to teaching using games? What was kind of the reception to that? How did you get that off the ground? How did you pitch that? How did you get people to take it a little bit more seriously?
I was finishing up, I was actually in the process of writing a different dissertation that to this day, just not very interesting at all. At the same time, the latest game in a franchise that I'd played since I was in second grade, Final Fantasy 15, had come out. And I'm always an early adopter, day one sort of guy. So I went and I purchased the game, and as I'm playing it, I'm about 40, 50 hours in, I realize, hey, I know some of the beats of this story. I know the tropes, this character, this sort of scenario, and my mind just started to kind of go. And I had, at this point, 2 degrees in religious studies, and I was like, okay, I need to kind of consult this. So literally, I took a Hebrew Bible and a controller, and I played through the rest of the game with one in each hand. And I would kind of play a little bit, then I would go and consult this text. And I would go back and forth. And I realized, hey, there are some striking similarities. So I thought to myself, maybe I could teach this to just like a small group of like interested students through student life or something. So it was almost like a video game book club, okay, where we're going to like read a little bit of like religious history and then also try to get it through this game. Well, at the same time, the University of Alabama came to me and said, hey, you've been teaching for us for a bit. Do you have any courses you might want to pitch? And I said, listen, I'm doing this really weird thing over here that's kind of interdisciplinary. Like, what do you think of that? And they said, we'd love to take a shot on that. And so I built it into a 13-week syllabus, and the class filled up immediately and had one of the best semesters ever. In fact, I still call that first class kind of like my pilot group, my pilot test. I did it 2 additional semesters, and through that completely changed my dissertation and really determined kind of the psychosocial benefits of using a video game to teach some of these classic stories. Not just through religious history, but literature and psychology, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my origin story, I guess, in using this.
We love a good origin story. Can you double click a little bit deeper into what you were saying about some of these comparisons you saw in religious texts? If you have an example or a little bit more about what do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So in this particular game, Final Fantasy 15, it's the story of a young guy named Noctis. That's where I get my name, by the way. Somebody in that original class could not remember my name. He was like, Professor. And then he just said, Professor Noctis. That is the origin story of my name, okay?
Love it.
And in that particular game, you're following the story of a young prince named Noctis. And this is the story of his ascension. Throughout his ascension story into being the king that is going to vanquish evil and all this kind of stuff, he undergoes a series of trials, a series of downfalls, and those correspond incredibly closely to stories of the Jewish king David, who is on the run from a king named Saul. The dynamic of Saul chasing down and wanting to overcome David, who has been, quote, chosen by the divine or chosen by the deity. This is the story of Noctis, beginning to end of Final Fantasy 15. And there are some key episodes in there when Noctis fights the behemoth to save these horse-like birds called chocobos. Okay, if you're not familiar with Final Fantasy, that sounds insane. I totally understand. They're essentially large chickens that you can ride. They don't have horses in this world. It sounds crazy for me to even say it, but in the world it makes sense.
Yep.
Anyway, he's protecting them like young, before he's king, David is protecting sheep and livestock. He's helping the local economy, and it's his first trial. Noctis does this sort of thing. It builds him up to a Goliath sort of moment where David fights Goliath. And so there were just little things like that. But then at the very end, in the reveal of this villain, I was like, okay, this is the Saul and King David narrative. And then it moves into more messianic tropes and things like that. But I found it to be an incredibly compelling parallel research study that clicks for students in some amazing ways.
Did this ruin games for you? I asked this because this happens with us sometimes, where we have spent so much time digging in, not ruin, but we've spent so much time digging into stories that we see tropes, we see stories, we see misses. We just saw this movie last night, and we were pretty critical on it. I'm not gonna say the film, but
there's a lot of kind of bumming out once you were able to kind of identify, oh, we've seen this in play before. We're kind of wondering, if that kind of experience has popped up for you as well, or did that parallelism create more kind of intrigue for you?
It's a pretty good question. I think that formulas work for the most part, but if they don't do anything interesting with the formula, then it is going to be a failure. And so, you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's monomyth, Hero of the Thousand Faces, all that kind of stuff. That it works for a reason, right? All major epic adventures follow this basic trope, but what's really interesting is the lens of culture, the lens of character, place, all that kind of stuff that plays into the storytelling. So what I try to do is utilize a modern game to help us use it as a lens to understand a pre-modern story. And that's probably what makes this really exciting to me. Now, playing this game, especially for my dissertation, I sunk 500, 600 hours into the game just trying. I was writing a dissertation. You expect that kind of thing on it. So it was like, I never really got tired of it. And the reason that I didn't was because I kept finding new I guess diamonds in the rough to say it. It was like I'm scouring this text and I'm continually finding new things and then sharing them with students. And they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. And it's such a cool thing when you're in that active research mode.
Do you know if that was on purpose? Do you know if these writers are actually trying to emulate these iconic stories, or it's something we see a lot? It's just happening.
They would never say that.
Okay.
I would say they've never spoken specifically about Final Fantasy 15. However, the things that I found in that game, I would be incredibly surprised if they did not have some knowledge or researching of especially ancient Near Eastern messianic concepts of sacral kingship. Some of the things that they specifically say in there is like there is a real knowledge of Babylonian, Canaanite, Mesopotamian tribal religious kingships and monarchies. And then specifically in, like I said, this Judeo-Christian text particularly. Now, it's not exclusive. There's some Norse mythology. There's some Greek myths, even some Hercules allusions in it, but I think that this is primary. My dear friend MJ Gallagher actually wrote a book on Final Fantasy VII that's called Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, and he and I always speak about what are the specifically religious influences that have come into these games, because it's obvious that they are all existent. Several of the games, including 15, have Leviathan, which is a chaos monster of creation. They have Bahamut, which is a Persian adaptation of the behemoth, another chaos monster that's in religious literature in the Middle East. And so we're always trying to piece together, why did they choose this particular thing? I did a video recently on the use of a demon called Eligor, who makes his appearance in the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is kind of a mystic literature book from the ancient Near East attributed to King Solomon. But in there's this figure known as Eligor that commands all these armies of hell and stuff. And my question was, why would they include this particular very niche depiction in this game? And there's really fascinating conclusions. But the developers themselves, they are going to very rarely say the exact citation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a fear of plagiarism or lack of originality. I don't know. But for me, it works, though.
See, I find that weird. And I 100% I agree that this happens all the time, and people are a little weird about it. But I find it weird that people are weird about it, because what's wrong with that? You know, and maybe it has more to do with the religious aspect than the myth aspect, where games don't want to brand themselves or like silo themselves. But it's these retelling of these iconic stories that shape society, right? It's such an interesting thing where I love it now that I see it more. When I'm watching a movie or I'm playing a game, I'm like, oh, I get this now. I get why society is this way. So I think it's really interesting how instead of spending time trying to do things that quote unquote feel more educational or feel less fun, finding education in fun things can be so much more impactful.
That's exactly right. I don't. Somebody asked me when I was defending my dissertation. They said, "So, do you think that we need to really delve into more educational games?" I said, "I hope not, because educational games, by and large, are terrible. Instead, make games that have passion behind them, research behind them, excitement, and are fun to play, and allow us to extract meaning from those things." So much in life and mythology and religion and politics, wherever stories are found, we gravitate towards those stories that we can make meaning of our lives from, and that's where I think video games are really an untapped resource. Something that I'm so excited to do in my profession and my opportunities, helping people make meaning of their lives. I was talking to somebody recently about the use of comic book movies as modern myths, right? So instead of Hercules or Poseidon or whatever, we are extracting meaning from Captain America and Avengers Endgame, and what does that really speak to us? In the same ways that earlier civilizations would have told these stories about Mount Olympus. And I think there's a lot to be said there. So the meanings that we make from ourselves from these formative stories, even modern stories, I think that is the best approach. It doesn't have to inherently be educational when you can extract it from anything.
Yeah, it's so funny because we're almost being secretive of it. It's weird because, like, if you look in like ancient societies, like mythology, we love mythology on the show.
Yeah.
These were stories meant to teach us things, right? And I feel like where I see it happening in society today, deliberately, is really in children's television programming, right?
Yes.
We see them making conscious efforts to educate and teach and explore the people to the world. But for some reason, we don't do it as adults anymore. And I know a lot of mythology was for kids still, but for some reason, we kind of abandon storytelling as a lesson. Now, to be clear, we all only learn through stories. We truly believe that. But it's almost accidental or secretive now.
It is, and I think that there's probably a few reasons for that. But I mean, we could go around here and talk about our favorite movies of all time. And when you ask somebody about their favorite movie, yes, they're going to talk about the acting and the production and all of that kind of stuff. But a lot of times, they're also going to talk about what that story meant to them. Maybe the first time they saw it, what was going on in their life, and how it helped them frame their current situation. Again, it's meaning making, meaning extracting from something that may not have intentionally done it, but the ingredients were there.
And speaking to a little more to your teaching experience too with video games, is it in your experience that your students have to actually be playing the game to understand whatever point you're trying to teach, or is it enough for them to backseat game? What is that experience like?
It's a different experience if you play the game or watch the game, but I allow for both experiences, and it creates some amazing discussions in the class. Playing a game versus viewing a game, even watching a streamer, like half of the class will watch me live stream it on Twitch or YouTube, and I'll give some commentary and stuff. But half the class will watch me do that, and the other half will play it on their own. And when they come to class, the way they speak of the game is incredibly different. We actually get this with anybody that's going to play a game, especially a little kid. Students that play the game sit in class and they'll say, well, I remember when I went into the cave and I did this. Whereas people that are watching it are going to say, I remember when Noctis went into the cave and did this thing. And so this is a clue that something is different in the processing of memory. And this is all research-based. It is science and data-backed. The idea is when you are experiencing a story, even a compelling one that you really feel engrossed in, if you are a spectator, like in a movie, a book even, TV show, your memory, your brain processes that as a third-person memory. But when you have agency, a controller in your hand, and you're playing through it, it processes it as a first-person memory. It's the reason why when you talk to a child who's played Mario for the first time, they say, I saved the princess, not Mario saved the princess. Every kid does that to a degree. And so in the same way, my question was, can we utilize and leverage these first-person memory experiences? Can we tie it to something that they don't have much concern or interest in, like biblical literature or mythology or something like that, psychology even? And the answer is yes. So when I say David went to the cave in 1 Samuel, they can equate that with, oh, I remember going into that cave as Noctis. And if I do a good job as the teacher of making those connections, then the impulses fire in a really cool way. And for the test, for retention, they're able to recall the primary source material better because they played the video game themselves. But also, I knew, and any gamer, it's hard to explain to non-gamers, but any gamer knows that those emotions are real. The sadness you feel, the excitement you feel during a story because you play a part in it, that is, there's really nothing quite like it. It is, I don't want to use the word manipulation, but it is in some ways creating a facsimile of your real world emotions in something that matters less. It's less risky than the real world. So the sadness over loss that you feel in the game, it is real, but it's not reality. And so I think that that's a really fun way of experiencing these benefits, this growth, and kind of having a growth mindset in a safe place. And so those are the reasons why I wanted students to play this game instead of watch it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. It's something we actually talk about a lot on the show through a lot of different storytellers. And
Mm-hmm.
we got this term from Dr. Andrea Letamendi about this idea of parasocial relationships.
Mm,
We're building these parasocial relationships with these characters, and it allows us to experience things in a psychologically safe way and
yes.
learn lessons about having to go through them. And I think games is such an interesting version of that because it takes you a step further where you can have some more agency and actually try different things and experience different things without actually having to live it versus like a movie or a book where it's the story's written, you follow along and you can connect with person when you find parallels instead of having that agency.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There is real risk and there's real reward, a sense of accomplishment. And because of that, you've processed the story in your memory, in your mind, in a way that you'll never forget it.
What I find really interesting about your story is that you studied religion at the highest levels, right? Which means you've read very complicated texts, right? You've read big old books,
Yeah.
um, and it's interesting because it's like such a divide, right, between reading these really complicated and hard and intense books that I can't even
Mm,
imagine to playing these games and having, I'm gonna guess, a little bit more of an enjoyable time and being more
usually.
engulfed in the story. And it's funny because we're talking about such similar stories, right, and
Yeah.
such interconnected stories. When you're teaching religion and you're teaching myth through stories, what has been some of the most interesting reactions when you see students kind of understand, oh, now I get this story better? Have you had moments like that?
Every semester. So in
Mm-hmm.
this particular class, the Final Fantasy 15 Kingship class, we close the class out around a bonfire, and we do
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a final campfire, which is a symbol in the game that kind of happens. So it's kind of cheesy, but we all sit around, and I ask them to tell a little bit of their own personal story. And again, these are personal, not private, and I always tell them that. So use discretion. But their task is to bring a photo, and it can be a digital photo of what we call a stage of their own ascension story. So it could be trials that they've experienced, relationships that they've honed that have led them to where they are, a moment of responsibility where they have to kind of put on a quote ring of kingship and make a tough choice, or how have they brought or delivered justice or order to a world of chaos. So I asked them to choose one of those four things. They bring a photo and we sit around the campfire, and they every time they'll say, so when I was in high school or this past semester, and they'll tell their story, and they'll say, when we were learning about how David or King Uzziah or whoever it was experienced this particular emotion, this is what I was thinking about. I was tying it with when I was on the football team, or when I didn't get first chair, or when I didn't get whatever it was, right? And they said, I never thought that something like this could mean more to me. I get students that are religious, non-religious, gamers, non-gamers. And around that campfire, we are human. Like there is this
Mm-hmm.
truly human uniting experience where it's like we may not all think alike, but we live alike. And there is this commonality among us that is this beautiful sharing. And to me, that was the worth and value of this course, to kind of bring all of our stories together and say, okay, this literature, these religious texts, all of it helps us make meaning of this moment in our lives. Really cool stuff.
Amazing. I mean, I can still remember playing The Witcher 3 and how, for some reason, that game taught me a great lesson about parenting. Because
Mm,
you know, as Geralt, you play this kind of father figure to Ciri, a young lady character in the game, and based on your choices throughout the story, you get to kind of decide towards the end, what happens to this character, which kind of
Yeah.
profession she takes on, what kind of life she gets to have. And it's so fascinating, looking at, not just the game itself, but how other players are interpreting and choosing between these different choices and explaining why they got to where they are. A lot of people say, I want Siri to become this because it looks like a more happy and free life than that other option. But for me, I found myself picking that different option every single time because it is only through that path I get to show her all the options that's available in front of her. I feel like as a parent, I have to expose her to all the choices so that she can choose and ultimately decide whether or not I like it or not. I shouldn't be hiding potential options from her.
This is so good, right? Because someone else that plays The Witcher 3 may have a completely different mindset of that. And what's really amazing about these kind of interactive stories is that we can't play them without inserting at least some version of ourselves.
Yeah.
Even if we're trying to go against what we would normally do, there's still that mentality of like, I'm actively choosing to act in a way that I wouldn't act in normal life. This is what I try to do with my students. Again, I say to them, you're always going to bring to the text, and in our case, a game, your breadth of experience. My job as your educator is to give you a lens through which to see this story differently. And so that's why for my class, I do about a month where we don't touch a video game. I'm going to give them the quote primary text of whether it's religious work or literature, psychology, philosophy, whatever it is. I'm going to give you a month of that so that when we begin to play the game, you're bringing that lens with you because we're going to really discuss that. And so you're bringing this optimal parenting sort of thing, but somebody else is bringing maybe a more chaotic energy. Now, here's what's really interesting to me, because I'm asked this question a lot. It's the question of how much do you impact the game versus how much does the game impact you? And this is incredibly important when it comes to, just the debate over violent video games. Do video games make someone violent? And the answer is a bit muddled, but really the data is going to lean into the idea that you bring the lens into the game that you already have, right? And so a game may or may not, or it may not make you more violent, but if you have a lens toward aggression, then this may foster that. If you have a lens toward peacemaking, then this is going to foster that. You can think of Call of Duty, first-person shooters, all of that kind of stuff. It's a playground to exercise what is already there. And that's why, for my sake, parents, educators, anybody involved in curation of these stories, we have to author the narrative of players going into the games, especially when it's our kids and stuff, we have to set that lens and framework.
I find this fascinating. And, we talk a lot about this when we have comic book guests, because I'm a big comic book person. And it's this weird mindset thing, right? You see a kid reading a book and you're like, wow, good for him, right? You don't feel the same way when they're playing video games or they're reading comic books. And it's so frustrating and weird because they're not necessarily reading the Bible, right? They could be reading anything. Everyone, oh, look at that. I'm like, what? And it's this thing we study too as storytellers, is that your audience has no responsibility to you. You don't get bonus points for reading something hard and getting nothing out of it, right? When you could be reading something, having fun or enjoying your life and getting immense meaning from it.
Right. Well, and that's one of the conversations that I have currently. I had a parent talk to me, a physician actually, talking about her son who spends copious amounts of hours on Fortnite, as every teenager does in the world right now. And she was just really concerned. She's like, all he wants to do is Fortnite. And I was like, well, what is his favorite map? What's his favorite strategy of all the seasons that he's been in? I just began to ask questions about it. She's like, well, I'm not really sure. I know that he's been playing the current one. And I said, well, listen, I don't play Fortnite. It's not really my style of game, but I keep enough with it because it's industry stuff. So I said, well, the latest chapter or season of Fortnite is on Greek mythology. And she said, oh, really? Well, she said, actually, I knew that because he loves the Poseidon stuff. And I was like, so does he know the story of Poseidon? She said, well, I don't know. I don't know if they've really learned that in school. And I said, but you know the story of Poseidon, right? You know the story of the Odyssey, right? Odysseus and Poseidon's kind of like antagonism. She's like, oh yeah, I had to learn all that. And I said, this is the conversation that you can be having with your kid. He's being exposed to Poseidon right now, and you know that stuff. So around the dinner table, when he's going on and on and on, as a kid does, about what they're excited about, you can offer something. And that way, when he goes back to Fortnite, it's not just mindless, but he's remembering the story you told him. And she was like, I've never thought of it that way. I was like, nobody would. But because people that love these stories don't often play these games. But we're in this intergenerational period right now where people like me are standing in that gap. Not old enough to not be a gamer, but not young enough to have forgotten the former ways.
Yeah, I talk about this all the time, especially when we started the show. I'm interested in mythology. But that came from comic books. The only reason I got into that is because I was into comic books as a kid, right? And it's this thing where mythology is fascinating and weird, and there are lessons in mythology, and then there's really not lessons in mythology, right? There's all these really weird things, and you know better than me, but when you go into Greek mythology and realize the big three are kind of this terrible gods, right? It's this thing where it's like I got so many lessons from different mediums, and it's where I love that story because there's so many ways we can intersect and so many ways we can explore these passions to branch out into other things. But because people try to cut them off at the seam, or don't try to understand what they can pull from it and to try to rebel against it, we're missing those opportunities.
Yeah, we're missing these opportunities, and we are missing an entire generation because they are spending an insane amount of time on games. I mean, if you look at the economics of it, the gaming industry, even before COVID and the pandemic, it was exploding and only has risen since 2020. This year alone, we've got the latest Black Ops coming out, one of the best-selling franchises of all time. Later this year, we've got the revival after 10 years of EA college football, which is going to bring in a whole new mainstream audience. And then next year, we have the latest iteration, after I think about 15 years, the latest Grand Theft Auto. These sort of stories, like, we're going to hear news headlines, you can mark my words, of latest controversies with Call of Duty and violent video games. We're going to hear about husbands, fathers spending insane amount of times playing EA college football. And the next year, the degradation of society through Grand Theft Auto 6. We're going to hear all of it. The question is, what is the need for people to play these games? What is it satisfying? And number two, what are some of the lessons that are being reinforced in the mind simply by playing through these games? I think it'll be a great discussion. I look forward to having those.
Yeah, it's fascinating because also gaming is so diverse, right? I think it's harder to explain to a parent why you can get lessons from Grand Theft Auto versus you can pull lessons from Fortnite, right? Final Fantasy, which is probably a little less controversial, right? And it's because it gets bundled all together. And it's a storytelling element. We talk about labels a lot on this show, about things getting bundled all together, where you can find bad aspects in pretty much anything if you look hard enough.
Totally.
Yeah. So it's
and this is something I say in my classes. I'm like, I'm letting you play this game, or we do another class where we don't play the full game, but play excerpts from The Last of Us Part 2, right? They have to have a cursory knowledge of Part 1. And I just have to tell them, not everything in this game is going to align with maybe your values, modern sensibility, whatever it is. But for the purpose of let's experience a story together and really dissect it, we're going to play through this and stuff. So I think that, again, my job as a curator of these games and stories is to help people think deeply and have a lens to process them.
It's something I find frustrating about this kind of modern world of immense content and like immense aspects to any little niche in book or TV. There's beauty in that for sure, and the distribution channels that
Yeah.
allow us to see the world we want to see. It's frustrating that we have to almost like qualify or disclaimer, not everything in this is going to fit your values. And
Yeah.
that's so frustrating because it shouldn't. We shouldn't only be seeking things that fit our values, because then we don't grow, we don't change, we don't find new things.
Yeah.
Right? We should be seeking things that are totally different from our values. You don't have to change because you played the game, right?
Yeah. And that is frustrating. I mean, you went to school. You probably had these moments where it's like, we're going to read a text that's a little spicy here. Just understand. And that is the same way with games. I mean, for me as an educator, I constantly say to my students, your job is to process and to be curious. My job is to curate dissonance. And so I'm going to bring in things that sell you on one angle, and then I'm going to bring in a counterexample, and then we're going to really dissect this. And by the end of the day, hopefully you have no idea where I stand on the story or the issue or whatever, but I've just kind of like created this mess for you to bring order to. So I really try to do that, and especially when I'm in a religious studies class, boy, you get some really passionate people from every different religion, every different philosophy and mindset, and to curate all of that and help them to listen to one another, and then to use something safe like a game where we're extracting meaning and helping people see things. It's one of the coolest things that I get to do, but it is incredibly frustrating for students sometimes.
Yeah. And I wish, of course, like this existed in my school, in my schooling, because I would have loved, and I think it is kind of a miss for me that I didn't pursue this more, but I would love to study more religion, right? But I think for me, as someone who's become a more avid reader since college, but with everything we had to read, and I loved my philosophy courses and I loved my psychology courses, and I had a friend who minored in both religion and econ. I'm like, that's so interesting.
That
but
is
like,
a fascinating pairing.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't think I could have brought myself to read some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just like, it sucks if I could go back and tell myself to do it, because whether you believe in what you believe, religion in these churches and these iconic books built society, right? And there's so many parallels in society. So finding a way to teach this in an interesting and encapsulating way can unlock things in every discipline.
100%. This is why I get so excited about teaching various religious texts and religious philosophies from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, all of it. I try to incorporate these because I'm not interested in helping students figure out like, oh, hey, I want to be that or whatever. I'm more interested in helping them make meaning of their own lives, A. B, figure out how others, even those in their own country and their own town, are also making meaning. Because if you can understand how somebody's making meaning of the world that they've inherited, then you can understand their ethical decisions, you can understand their politics, you can understand their perspectives, and that can develop more empathy, which I think is a goal of education, to make that which was formerly foreign more familiar to the student. And that, I believe, is one of the best things about this kind of dissonance I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you said some things there that are so important. One, empathy being a core part of education. And also, you mentioned earlier about like in schooling, bringing in kind of the spicy books and bringing in the controversial stuff. I think one sad thing, I think it's happening less, you know? And I think we can no longer default to the idea that you went through an institution, your values were tested, which is the primary point of college, in my opinion, you know? And it's
certainly
hard
to help expand. And the question is, you know, we have students that are going to grad school and they'll come to us and they'll ask questions. And they will come with this idea of, if I go to this grad school, then I know that I'll kind of learn these types of things. And if I go to this one, then I'll learn this stream. There is truth to that. But what's interesting is a student that will say to me, I'm planning on going here, but I still want to learn these things that they don't have an expertise in. Where would I go for that? And somebody once told me that the mark of an educated person is not knowing all the answers, but it's knowing where to go to find the answers, you know? And that's the kind of question that I love. It's the kind of question that said, I want to learn more about this, even though there's not an opportunity for me to. Where would I go? That's the curiosity that is like, yes, I love that in my class.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many examples of this, right?
Yeah.
Like I hate Shakespeare, but I don't hate Shakespeare, but I hated learning Shakespeare in high school because it was hard and
Relatable. Yeah.
they don't make it relatable, right?
Yeah.
Right? But like, I love The Lion King.
Yeah. Right? and that's what I'm talking about. Like, you could use The Lion King to teach this, and a good educator is going to do that and say, so here's the basis. And this is kind of my MO for every class. First month, I'm going to give you the primary source. Then I'm going to give you something that you're interested in. And we're going to dissect The Lion King. And then we have a synthesis, right, of all of it. And if you do those three things, you are really going to be getting the most out of this. And you're going to understand the primary text better by the end of it. It's for this reason that I've started doing kind of what I call prof recommendations, which is it's not saying this game is worth playing or not, but it is, this is my recommendation for added reading or added research while you're playing this game. Serendipitously, next to my GameStop in Tuscaloosa, where my university is, right next to it, there's a Barnes & Noble. So I never go to buy a game without also going into Barnes & Noble, because I am the kind of guy that I've got to have a companion piece. So I remember I bought Ghost of Tsushima, and it's a story or a game about Japanese samurai culture. And I went and I bought 2 books on Japanese folklore and mythology just because I wanted to familiarize myself with that lens as I played the game. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And so that would be a great recommendation. I think that more and more, I would love to see gamers say, I've got companion pieces, and it's not just study or strategy guides for the game.
Well, Wade, we have learned so many great stories and insights from you today. And to be mindful of your precious time, for our closing segment, we call it Suspenders. This is where we ask you a fun, random question that's unrelated to anything, and you can give us any answer you feel like.
Okay.
Question of the day is, who's your favorite character on One Tree Hill? I saw your stream the other day, and you talked about it. I just have to know.
Man, that's such a great question. Yeah, so big One Tree Hill fan. Dude, I love Nathan. Nathan, he is this antagonistic brother during season 1 to his kind of half brother Lucas, and he starts out as such a jerk, but by the end of it, he becomes this just lovable, good guy that stands up for what he believes in, stands up for those that he loves. His arc is just amazing. And it's like, and he's really good at basketball, which is something that I've never been. He is just so cool to me. From when I was, 16, 17 years old, I was like, man, that guy is so cool. And even now, I'm like, I wish I was that cool. So Nathan Scott.
Nathan Scott definitely has an interesting arc. I mean, I was always a Brooke Davis person.
Of course, Brooke is so good.
Brooke is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think I default to Brooke a lot.
She's so good.
It could be because of Sophia Bush, though. I think Sophia Bush is awesome. Hearing
also
a lot of
incredible
podcast work. Yeah. So I've always been a big Brooke Davis person. Kev, who's yours?
Is
it Brooke?
I'm between Brooke and Peyton, and I think I don't know if you've finished the entire series or not, Wade, but one thing that does not get talked about enough, and this could be a whole episode in itself, is how much suffering that the writers put Peyton through.
Isn't that the truth? I mean, it is just trauma dump all on Peyton.
Yeah.
Every season. Somehow she's peripherally involved in every car wreck that happens at the end of every season.
And that show loves a good car wreck.
They love a good car wreck. So good.
Okay, well, we could talk for 1 trio for hours, but we really appreciate your time. We learned a lot from you, so thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. This has been great. Cool conversation.
Welcome back to Top Hat. This is the part of the episode where we dissect and analyze some of the interesting and cool and amazing and spectacular learnings we got from this week's expert storyteller. And this week we had someone really interesting. We had ProfNoctis, who really combines with his extensive education in religion and theology, religion with video games, with education, and it was a really, really interesting conversation. I think one of the first things that's really important to me about this is that I know that you, Kevin, a lot of people feel about video games the way I feel about comic books, where it's a big part of our childhood, it's a big part of the way we grew up, but it's a big part about how we learn lessons. I still read different graphic novels. There's some really amazing stories being told in these mediums, but they still don't get the respect they deserve, in my opinion. I think video games is the same way. I think back about history of stories too. Movies, TV, back in the day was seen as kind of the junk food of storytelling, right? What I loved about our conversation was that this is a guy who has a huge and detailed educational bench. And what I mean by that is we often really respect, and I do, education. This is a guy who's read extremely dense and big texts and important texts that shape the modern world. And he is saying, hey, this is all my stuff. This is everything I've done. You can learn lessons through video games, right? And it's the retelling of these stories in digestible and interesting and interactive ways that are allowing our communities, our children, our gamers to learn very similar lessons in a more interactive and fun way. And this is something that I think is really important. You do not get extra credit for reading the hard text, Because something's hard, because something's boring, because something takes a lot of your energy, because you hate doing something, doesn't give you extra credit. If I can read a comic book or a graphic novel, or often a television show, and get the same lessons or be stimulated in the same way as reading a 10-hour book, why is that bad? Why do we respect that lesson? And I think that the reason I do that is because some forms of storytelling are seen as better than others, and that's just simply not true. We are telling the same stories or similar stories in different ways. Find the medium that works for you for that story. It's going to make you smarter, because video games and comic books and all these disrespected mediums can make you smarter. Just like there are amazing television shows and trash television shows, there's amazing graphic novels and trash graphic novels. Same with gaming. This is such a huge, wide spectrum. And we are in a place with games where there's so much more investment going to them. There's so much more eyes going to them. As technology changes and as entertainment changes, gaming is on the rise in a huge way that if you don't pay attention to this industry, if you disregard it as stupid or waste of time, you are going to miss the boat on this next wave of storytelling. And that's why something I've talked about many, many times on the show, I am such a big advocate for diversity of storytelling. I read scripts, I read books, I watch TV, I watch movies, I game tiny bit. I gotta do better at that. But I'm a big advocate for this idea of diversity of storytelling because there's so much out there more than that one thing you respect most. This has been your rant from Gaurav, brought to you by and sponsored by the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie. The Linen Suit and Plastic Tie. We make no money, but we spend a lot. Back to you, Kevin.
I'm Kevin, and I approve this message. And you're right. At the end of the day, it's the compelling, the important stories that are going to prevail. So if there's a way we can consume that story in a more enjoyable and more entertaining and smoother way, why not try it out? Why not make that learning experience itself more engaging as well?
You
And
know, I think a lot about TikTok and YouTube Shorts when we talk about this as well, right? It's YouTube short and TikTok obviously has a lot of other complexities and debates that I think are separate than this. But
mhm.
I'm talking about this kind of short form video aspect of entertainment. And again, we see a whole generation disrespecting it and just ignoring it and not thinking about it. But we see a younger generation that is engaged in it, that's learning through it. And by disrespecting and ignoring it, you're going to miss the wave. But by leaning into it and say, hey, how can we use this for education? How can we use this to teach? Is so important. And that's how kids and Gen Z and people are engaging with stories. Leaning into that and saying, hey, there's something here. There's some reason why this is compelling. This works. How can we tell stories better through that medium? Instead of saying, oh no, novels are the only way. Don't do this. It's everything in moderation. It's balance. It's finding new and exciting ways to tell historic stories and new stories as society changes.
And I'll be honest, part of the reason why I read books is so that I can tell people that I read and so that I can
Fair.
get that respect out of them, right? But
Well, I mean, reading is the antithesis of gaming,
mhm,
not in the sense that one is more valuable for learning. If you and I read the same books, we are going to have the same experience from a technical sense if we're reading the same words, we're seeing the same punctuation. But our imaginations will take things differently. We'll see things differently. We'll empathize with things differently. But with gaming, um, it's even more complex where you and I could have a very different experience, and empathy even would be a little bit easier because we kind of become the character.
yeah. And speaking of what makes video games unique as a storytelling medium, we had this great discussion about the difference versus playing the story versus watching the same story. And when you're playing, it gives you a unique sense of agency because you are being the character, you are taking actions to kind of progress the story and impact the game and the story. And as a result, you remember it in first person is I did this, I pushed the story forward, I made this decision. Versus when you're watching is this character in third person. This is how the story progressed, and it makes the material more memorable to you. And I was playing the character, so I was seeing the direct result of the actions I took. So that's what I find fascinating about the storytelling medium.
Well, one of the most powerful things that storytelling gives us is empathy, right? It's the ability to explore and learn and experience things without having to experience them themselves.
Yeah, I recently had to play this video game where a part of it was you need to control like a 7, 8 year old little girl asking for help in the slums because your mother is terminally ill and about to die. And that was a deeply emotional experience. And obviously, I'm not a 7 year old little girl, but you really kind of feel that loneliness and helplessness. And that is the power of the empathy that storytelling enables us. But this has been another great episode of the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. If you like our content, make sure to subscribe and follow wherever you listen. Leave us a comment and a review to let us know what you're thinking. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at LSPTPod. LinkedIn, Linen Suit and Plastic Tie.
You don't have to justify what you like. You don't have to justify how you learn. Find things that work for you. Spend your money and your time on things you want to spend your money on time. Not because you have a reasoning, not because you can explain it to yourself, not because you can explain it to your partner, your friends, but because in that moment, that's what you vibe with. Spend more time doing what you just vibe with versus what you're trying to explain. We love you. We appreciate you giving us the time to get through this entire episode and come to the end. And we hope you learned something. It means the world to us, and we're going to keep working hard to give you more lessons about the amazing, the powerful, the epic art of storytelling.